Sure. So thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the blue button, and I think the distance is not as great as we potentially have made it out to be. I think there is a path or a road that we can travel that will probably get us there faster. So the first thing that I want to clarify is what is blue button? Because I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what it is. The first thing is it is not a single specification for how patients access their data. It is not strictly one way that the information is formatted for a patient. So it started at the Office of the National Coordinator as a campaign to educate patients that they had, under HIPAA, the ability to get a copy of their data in an electronic format. And it actually grew out of some discussions that we had with Todd Park and others within the administration. And that campaign then is supported by a portfolio of standards. And I want to sort of step you through how Blue Button sort of got conceptualized and really how it's evolved over time, because I think as we think about how we might use Blue Button as a campaign and think about the technical specifications that underlie it, there's a natural progression as to what the next steps might be. So as part of the campaign, the Office of the National Coordinator had a pledge program in which people could sign up and be listed on the ONC website to say that they are participants in getting patients to have access to their information in an electronic format. And so a whole host of different organizations, both data holders as well as others, have agreed that they would provide electronic access of information related to healthcare as part of this campaign. Now, there's a significant variation in the way in which those technical specifications that underlie it all work. But if you take a look at all those folks, 50% of us can get our health records via one of those Blue Button partners. So there's a whole host of folks that have already committed to providing electronic access to their information, and they're out there right now. Now, there's some variations in how that happens, and we'll talk a little bit about that next. But I think the first thing that I want to do is, before we think about how to solve the problem of getting access to this information and engaging patients with a Blue Button, it's important because the kind of answer you get oftentimes depends on how you frame the question. And I think we talked about it a little bit yesterday, you know, whether or not we're building a building or if we're doing city planning, how you frame the question affects the way that you come up with an answer. And so I'm going to put up my framing and how we thought about the problem with regard to the Blue Button and kind of putting out this information. So if we think about a national cohort data ecosystem, given the scale and complexity, it will almost invariably be decentralized in its control. So that means that there needs to be federation and data sharing, and we did see Josh put up the diagram that talked about kind of centralized control. It doesn't necessarily mean a person. It could be a standard as a way of sort of reducing that complexity. Could be a multi-use data use agreement, which the VA and the DoD have signed as a way of sort of providing that as well. So the thing that's going to be important is that the patients will be the common feature across all of these different engagements that we have. It's important to know that as we start out this project, our requirements are unknowable to begin with. They are diverse, and even if we think we get it right now, it will change over time. So that suggests that solutions that we come up with need to be iterative, they need to be incremental, because we will learn as we go. If we think we've got it right at the beginning, it's likely that things are going to change. And so we have to think about that as we come up with our solutions. It means that there will be continuous evolution and deployment. We have to tolerate differences in semantic, syntax, and sophistication about people's ability to interact. And as this is going to be iterative and incremental and continuous in its evolution, we need to do what I call take the path of least regret, so that when we make a choice, we don't necessarily box ourselves into a particular approach because we have lots of options that might be available to us. Normal failures are going to be a characteristic of these large systems. So security is important, but recovery and restoration are going to be important as well. We're never going to be able to completely secure it. We need to make all of the possible ways to encrypt and to protect that information, but realize that we have to be able to think not only about security, but recovery and restoration as part of this. And finally, I think our job as sort of the groups that are thinking about this is going to be one about orchestration rather than command and control. we have to help orchestrate this work rather than playing all the instruments. And how we create that conductor role, I think, is going to be really important. So when we think about the blue button and how to engage patients, at least at that technical level, this is the way in which we've sort of thought about the problem. So when it comes to kind of technically how we're going to develop the roadmap to get to, and we've talked a little bit about APIs and stuff, so I'm going to give you just a quick introduction on the 5 things that we need to think about in terms of standardizing so that we can actually engage with all these patients and get their data. The first thing that we need to standardize is meaning, so that when I say congestive heart failure and you say dropsy, we actually mean the same thing. The second thing that we have to standardize is structure, so that a computer can start at the beginning of a file and get to the end of the file and still be able to sort of understand all the buckets that it goes into. The third we have to do is we have to standardize transport, how we move information from one place to another. And then we have to also standardize security in the sense that I encrypt it and you can decrypt it and it flows. But if you take meaning, structure, transport, and security as the 5 things you need to standardize, and you roll them all into one package, that's what an API is that Peter's been talking about. It has a kind of controlled way of describing what the meaning is. It has a structure, transport, and security about how all of those things work. So, meaning is about semantic, content and structure is about syntactic, and we need to try to get to that level as well. So this is the most complicated slide. There's a lot of detail on it. Those who are watching on the web can write it down and tell me all the parts that I got wrong. But I want to use it as a way of sort of describing the progression of the Blue Button over the course of the last couple of years. So when Blue Button was first proposed at a Markle meeting in New York, and Todd Park was there and a whole host of other folks, Todd was saying, wouldn't it be great if we could just get our data? Like if there was just a button, like a blue button. And the term stuck. And the VA with Peter Levin and others sort of took the reins and started this thing called the Blue Button on the web portal. Initially, the only information you could get as a veteran was information you had already entered yourself. And then over time, they gradually increased the kinds of information that was there. And there was lots of free text, and it was kind of the formats changed and things like that. And the innovation community around that were saying, you know what, we need to make some changes because we don't have a target that allows us to have a consistent interface to developing apps and other things like that. And so working with the first batch of Presidential Innovation Fellows, we developed sort of that first iteration that was standardized. And it was based on the consolidated CDA. It's a standard for how CLAIR summaries were organized. And that became sort of using national vocabularies, using this kind of structured document approach that you could download. Then, as part of Meaningful Use Stage 2, within the Office of the National Coordinator, we actually included this notion of view, download, and transmit. The ability to view your information in a portal, download it using this standard syntax, and then being able to transmit it using direct or using some of these other specifications to be able to move it around. We have also now developed a series of other ways that the Blue Button standards can support. We have an explanation of benefits, so that CMS is working on developing a way that you can download an explanation of benefits that helps you understand kind of what's been billed against your number, your benefits. We have a care summary that is in a what's called a pub submodel, which isn't that I'm going to send you a snapshot of what it is, but I'm going to just send you the updates to your medical record as things go along. And so what we're suggesting is that if what we want to do is to get to this sync for science, there's probably 2 things that we need. We need both a full extract because, as Josh has sort of demonstrated, truth is something you triangulate by getting lots of other pieces of data. And so you need to have that full record of information. And so we need that full extract. But then we also need to kind of create this sync for science that will leverage some of the existing standards that are out there. And the thing is that as you standardize meaning, structure, transport, and security, you'll have those pieces come together in a very sort of modular way as we develop these standards. So, Sync for Science can leverage granular data because there is an existing standard for a common data element. That's what a CDE stands for. It's based around this standard called FHIR that is kind of the up-and-coming one. It's based around a lot of the latest and greatest industry practices on authentication and transport. And I think that's a standard that, leveraged within this community, could really help us with inclusion, exclusion criteria, and those things that we really need to kind of bring together. But we also need to have unstructured and comprehensive data. It's still not possible to get a complete extract of your medical record from an EHR and import it to another. And I think that is a real important thing that we can contribute back to this as well. So what do we need to get started? We need 3 things. Can you tell? It's either 5 or 3 or 4. I only have 5 fingers. That's as complicated as it's going to get. We need a way to extract all patient data from an existing EHR. Many of the standards are ready to test and use. You know, you just take a wrapper and you put it around a piece of text and you're able to sort of generate that. You need a begin and end file specification. You structure what you can, but you don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think getting it out there is kind of what we learned in the Blue Button activities, is more important than making it perfect when you start. But we also need to, when it makes sense, structure that granular data and to do it in a consistent way. And so this notion of a common data element standard, and we've been working with FDA, NIH, CDC, and others to sort of create this standard. It's useful for identifying those specific patient characteristics that you want to study. And then we need a way of grouping those into logical groups of data for things like case report forms and data sets. So if we can build on this, I think we can create the right building blocks to support this notion of a national cohort.
So by the nominal schedule, we have 35 minutes for questions, and I think